The reason why we read this passage this morning will, I trust, be made a bit more clear presently. For now, just please note that this woman who appeared to be poor, appeared to be in trouble, appeared to be mourning, had an audience with King David. Just note that for now. That's going to be kind of important a little bit later. Our sermon title this morning from 2 Samuel 15, primarily, Democracy, a Problem or a Solution. Because of our late start this morning, I'm not sure if I'll be able to get through all that I need to get through this morning. And then I thought, well, that's a problem because this is an election day sermon. And then I thought to myself, maybe it's not so big of a problem because we don't have election day anymore. We have selection month. At least that's what we had 4 years ago. So I guess in the future, if I'm going to preach an election day sermon, perhaps I should stretch it out to selection month and turn into 3 or 4 sermons actually. Because you might recall just how long it took last time and how predictable, quite frankly, the outcome was. In any case, I want to talk to you this morning about this because the Bible does speak to this issue, this topic of governance, of law, of right and wrong civically. Right and wrong just doesn't end with my personal choices. There's such a thing as righteousness in the civil sphere. There's such a thing as sin and wickedness in the civil sphere. 70 million dead babies would be able to talk to you about that point. My central idea this morning is that Absalom, and we're going to look at Absalom here in a moment. Absalom had all the traits necessary to get elected, but none of the traits necessary for service or authority. We're going to look at this morning. Absalom, he had what it took to get elected. He had the skill to go out there and campaign. He understood campaigning. He understood public looks. He understood image. He understood it. But then when it came time to act, he had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea what he thought he was doing, even worse, but no idea what he was doing. So we're going to take a close look this morning at Absalom and what he was able to do, how much he was almost able to destroy, and the necessity of knowing who you are actually voting for. A little bit of background here. It used to be we did not vote for senators from our states directly. It used to be our representatives did that. When we see democracy in the Bible to the extent that we do, we see it extends only to known personages. It does not extend beyond that. In other words, you're never called on to select someone that you don't have an opportunity to know. We will see that as we do this study. Once again, our central idea, Absalom had all the traits necessary to get elected, but none of the traits necessary for service or authority. See, is that not our problem? We think the person who's qualified to be elected is qualified to serve, is qualified to exercise authority. And we're going to find out this morning there are times when the two of them have nothing to do with each other. Nothing to do with each other. Absalom is going to show us this morning. Before we get started, I want to identify a word that you've probably heard before, but not often. The word is demagogue. A person, especially an orator or political leader, who gains power and popularity by arousing the emotions, passions, and prejudices of the people. You wonder, do we have statesmen any longer? We have no statesmen. All we have is demagogues. A person, especially an orator or political leader, who gains power and popularity by arousing the emotions, passions, and prejudices of the people. Remember that. We're going to run into a demagogue this morning as we study Absalom. But I want you to consider this as you go through life. When you hear someone speaking who wants to get elected or some kind of a public figure, am I listening to a statesman or am I listening to a demagogue? It's going to be one or the other. Make sure of that and don't forget it. As we get started this morning, before we look especially into 2 Samuel chapter 15, I have 5 questions for you this morning. Question number 1, have we replaced the divine right of kings with the divine right of the people? Number 2, for our present troubles, do we need more democracy or do we need less? Number 3, has the Bible spoken to the question of how we are to be ruled? Does the Bible have anything to say about that? Number 4, from whence or what source does all authority originate? Number 5, when God judges, is it a problem with the ruler or the ruled? Is it a problem with those who are in charge or those who are underneath the one who is in charge? Who is to blame? Who can we drag out here? A little elaboration on each one very briefly. I'll go over these questions again. 5 questions. Have we replaced the divine right of kings with the divine right of the people? Oh, we mock the idea of the divine right of kings, right? We got rid of that with George III and Charles I. Charles I, who wound up losing his head over the whole thing, if you know what I mean. We got rid of the divine right of kings. We got parliaments now. Have we replaced the divine right of kings with the divine right of the people? I think that's an easy answer. The way people talk about our democracy. You almost never even hear the word democracy by itself anymore. It's always our democracy. Like this little polished little idol that we carry around and stroke its little face and polish it. Our democracy. Please don't do anything to our democracy. Our democracy, you got to be kidding me. We now have a presidential candidate who never even got a single... When she was running for president back a few years ago, no one voted for her, hardly anyone. She's won a primary without winning a single primary vote. And these are the people that are all about our democracy. What liars and frauds we're dealing with here. What wickedness. What incredible lying. We're going to talk a little bit later about lying and the necessity of skillful lying for politicians today. It's a necessity. Have we replaced the divine right of kings with the divine right of the people? I say absolutely yes. We mock the divine right of kings and enshrine the divine right of the people. The people have spoken. You know, at least when the king spoke, you know if he was speaking or not. At least you knew that. The people, who knows? Who knows? Secondly, then, I ask, for our present troubles, do we need more democracy or less? Well, I trust our study of Absalom this morning will help us with this. Our third question, has the Bible spoken to the question of how we are to be ruled? And this is an interesting question for me because as a pastor, we're told constantly that pastors are not supposed to deal with questions like this. Big thank you to John for talking with me last week and us arguing about whether or not Christians can vote for Donald Trump. John and I talked about this. We had to have that discussion. How in the world can we not talk about that here in the church when that's exactly what people are going to be talking about from now for the next, probably, if things go the way I think they probably will, I don't know if we'll know by Thanksgiving who won this election. I don't know. We may. We may not. It took an awful long time last time. Has the Bible spoken to the question of how we are to be ruled? Well, of course it has. And do we really need to point out that the Bible has an awful lot to say to the civil sphere, including entire books named after civil magistrates? Joshua, Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. Samuel was a civil magistrate. He's a prophet, and he was a magistrate. 1st and 2nd Kings. These books named after kings. And we're saying today that as a pastor, I'm not supposed to speak to the civil sphere? If you say that, then you are not reading the Bible. You're reading something else. But it's not the Bible. 1st and 2nd Chronicles of the Kings. Nehemiah, Psalms and Proverbs speak extensively to the civil magistrate. Many times, the prophets, especially Jeremiah, he wasn't the only one, went to kings and spoke to them. John the Baptist spoke to Herod. Are we saying that we're not supposed to speak to kings? We're not supposed to speak to the civil sphere? Yeah, that's what we're saying. I hope we can figure out why we're in such a mess after having said that for about a generation or so. From whence, our fourth question, does all authority originate? Well, that's an easy one. Christ said, all authority is given to me in heaven and in earth. And that's why, as a pastor, it's my responsibility to tell civil magistrates that Jesus Christ has every bit as much authority in heaven as he does in earth. He has no less authority here on earth than he does in heaven. And he has all authority in heaven, he has all authority in earth, and all civil magistrates are to bow to him, and believe him, and obey him. And number 5, when God judges, is it a problem with the ruler or the ruled? And I trust that'll come clear to us as we do our study here this morning. I've got 6 characteristics for you from 2 Samuel, mostly from 2 Samuel 15, but also from 2 Samuel 14 as well. 6 characteristics. If you can put these characteristics together, you can probably get yourself elected to something. A lot of these elected offices pay. The ones on the real local levels do not often pay. Sometimes they pay very little. But you want to get elected? It's all about how you look. Not about how you are, how you look. Our characteristics that Absalom portrays, as we will see, are looking good, looking important, looking nice, looking wise, looking honest, and looking like you care. If you can do those 6, you're getting elected to something better than the other person who's trying the same thing. Well, what am I talking about? What are we talking about Absalom here? Well, Absalom, little background on Absalom. Absalom had a problem with his father. His entire political campaign, I'm not even sure he really wanted to be king. I'm not so sure about that. I think he hated his father. He hated his father for standing by while his sister, his full sister, was attacked and defiled. And his father did nothing. And I believe Absalom made it his life mission to get even with his father for that. And so while it looked like he had a political campaign going, like he would be a better king than his father, I'm not so sure he wanted to be a king. I do believe that he wanted to destroy his father. That's really what he wanted. In any case, he was a definite spoiled brat. David was a bad father. It wasn't just Absalom that he wouldn't correct. David had another son named Adonijah. As we won't have time to look at this morning, but in 1 Kings we find out that Adonijah was a son, very good-looking young man, who David never corrected, never said no to. Tell you what, young men growing up that are never told no, not good. Not good at all. The time to tell a young man no is the time before he's a young man. When he's a child, they need to learn that word no. It's one of the first things mankind was supposed to understand, right? No. Don't eat that tree. No. Absalom apparently never heard that word. Well, Absalom decided at some point that he wanted to topple his father. How do you topple a king like David? How do you do that? Now, some of the kind of weaker kings that we read about, especially in the northern kingdom and some in the southern kingdom, they're a little bit easier. But how do you topple David? David, the greatest military king Israel has ever had in their history. David, who delivered them from the Philistines way back when he was a kid, took care of the Goliath problem that they had for 40 days. How do you topple David? Well, you have to identify these characteristics that I mentioned. Looking good, looking important, looking nice, looking wise, looking honest, and looking like you care. Well, 2 Samuel 14, verse 25. We maybe have the most important one first, I don't know. Excuse me. Now, in all Israel, there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head at the end of every year, he cut it because it was heavy on him. When he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels according to the king's standard. Now, I don't know how much 200 shekels is, but it sounds like a lot to me. 200 of anything sounds like pretty much. Absalom had a great characteristic. Something you need to get elected. He was good looking. I won't ask for a raise of hands on that, but I've heard that. I've heard people say, I'm going to vote for this person because they're good looking. Now, I asked the question earlier, when God judges, is it a problem with the ruler or the ruled? You know, it sounds like the people of Israel at this time are not really paying attention. Everybody's talking. It says, look what it says. All Israel, there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. Everybody knew Absalom. You know what they knew about him? Good-looking guy. They didn't know much else, but he was good looking. Yeah. Here's a guy who might get elected to something. So he's a looker. Well done, Absalom. Number 2, looking important. Check this out. This is, I mean, it's like people running for office today. It's like they've taken lessons from Absalom. 2 Samuel 15, verse 1. After this had happened, that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Looking important. What a guy. 50 men to run in front of him. I don't have that. Boy, 50 guys, they must really, hey, I don't really know what's going on, but these guys, they really support Absalom. He must really be somebody important. And they're hired. Do you ever see someone who just announced that they are running for maybe a local office? And they stand in front, they do this all the time, right? They stand in front of a bunch of people, right, that have their campaign signs already. And they're waving their flags, and they're clapping and so forth, right? And you're looking at this and you're saying, the dude just announced. Where did he get all these people to support him? How did that happen? These people really support him? And so I looked into it, did some study on it. I found out, not surprising, that these are actors hired to look like they support the person. So their paid support is what they are. Well, they're not the first ones. Absalom, he really knew how to manipulate public opinion. He knew how to do it. I'll hire 50 guys to run. Think about it. These guys are not even horses or chariots themselves. They're so committed to Absalom that they'll run themselves. He's a guy in the chariot. I mean, does anybody think, you know what, maybe Absalom, maybe you should be the one running and let them ride in the chariot? I don't know. Wow, this guy's important. He's got 50 guys running in front of him. Vote for Absalom. Number 3, looking nice. So we got looking good, looking important, looking nice. Verse 2 of chapter 15 and verse 5. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was whenever anyone had a lawsuit that came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." Verse 5. And so it was whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. What a nice guy. Don't we all want a nice guy to be in charge? Absalom is nice. He wants to know where I'm from. He's concerned about me. Why, he wouldn't be out here if he wasn't concerned about me. He must be. Oh, look, we kiss each other's hands, whoever's kissing whose hands or whatever. Wow, King David doesn't do that. Excuse me, kind of a thing for me. Oh my, what a nice guy. You see, our 2024 time is not the only time when we put this idiotic premium on being nice. You know, to the extent that we put a premium on being nice, it appears that that's the same extent that we put a premium on being lied to. Is that not our condition today? We'd rather be lied to if it makes us feel good than told the truth if it makes us feel bad. Absalom's not going to tell anybody the truth. He's not interested in that. He's interested in being a nice guy. He's on his way to upsetting his father's throne. On his way. And looking wise. He's smarter than the rest of us. Look how he does this. This might be the trickiest one of all. And these poor people that went for it, shame on them. Verse 3. Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there's no deputy of the king to hear you." Now, these people should have been a lot wiser than this. You go up, right? There's Absalom. You tell Absalom one side of the story, and Absalom says, "You're right." He hasn't heard the other side. He has no interest in hearing this. It's not about that at all. He's about winning the hearts of the people. And you know what? They should have been wiser than this. They really should have. It should have been much wiser than this. They should have stood back and said, "Wait a minute. He's telling me my case is good and right. I bet you I could tell him almost anything, and he'd say my case is good and right. He hasn't heard the other side. He has no interest in it. But he looks pretty wise. We know he's wise. You know why? We all know who wise people are. Wise people are people that agree with us, right? It's not difficult. And foolish people are people that disagree with us. It's that inner lawyer problem that we've talked about before, right? That old inner lawyer problem. The inner lawyer that justifies me when I do something to my neighbor, and that same lawyer is a great prosecuting attorney when someone else does this exact same thing to me. And I don't want to spend time on it because I use this illustration way too much, probably, but it's the old cutting somebody off in traffic thing, right? Yeah, you get cut off in traffic and you want to strangle the guy. For just an instant, you hope he has an accident and his car flips and he dies in a fiery crash. For just an instant, oh, come on now, come on. You've all been there. Just an instant. It's not long. How about when I cut somebody else off? Sorry about that. Sorry, bro. Hope it doesn't upset you. You see, that inner lawyer is ready to prosecute my neighbor, but defend me at the same time. Absalom knows something about the inner lawyer here. Yeah, he knows that the people coming up, they want to hear their case. You got a guy telling their case is good and right, but the problem is you're not going to get justice here. Oh, only if I were king you'd get justice. Looking honest. If looking good, looking important, looking nice, looking wise, looking honest. Verse 4. Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice." Oh, yeah, I'm just here. Yeah, I get up here early in the morning. These guys are running in front of my chair and so forth. Oh, man, all I really want to do is give people justice. You know, the people had enough information to know that he was not about justice at all. They had that information. But boy, you tell people what they want to hear long enough, and all of a sudden your mind starts to get goofed up. And their minds were goofed up by Absalom here. He was, don't forget it, he was a murderer. He was a murderer. And these people want to go to this guy for justice. Remember, he murdered his brother Ammon because his father wouldn't act. And that's the guy you're going to get justice from? Bad move. But he looks honest. I'm just here because I believe in justice, that's all. Number 6, looking like he cared. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Looking like he cared. He's out there. He's got an act going on. He's a tremendous actor. And he looks like he cares. There's just a couple things I want to say about this. And it looks like I'll have to finish this sermon next week. But the reason why we read what we read before about the woman who comes to the king and the king listens to her, you know, again, you got to read the Bible here, right? Absalom was willing to say that there's no one from the king to hear you. He doesn't even have a deputy. But what we just read this morning from what John read, there was a woman who looked like she was in mourning, and she got an audience with the king herself. So it was a flat-out lie to say that there's no one from the king to hear you here. It was just a lie. We know it was a lie because of the audience that woman had. But what happened was Absalom was able to stop to get people before they got to the king and steal their hearts in the meantime. But there's something else that I want to, shall I say, take a minute on. You may or may not have heard of Machiavelli. I just want to talk about this briefly because we all want to grow up, we want to mature. We want to be able to spot liars when we see them, when we hear them. We want to be able to spot public frauds and not be taken in by them like the children of Israel actually were. And it almost was an extremely bloody time. It was a bloody time, but not for everyone. This is from Machiavelli. Machiavelli was an Italian nobleman who wrote a book called The Prince. And he talked about ways to gain and maintain power. And I want you to understand this, that our politicians know about Machiavelli. And from this article, says this, and it quotes Machiavelli here in a moment. Appearances not only can be deceptive, as Machiavelli points out in chapter 18, concerning the way in which princes should keep faith. You're going to hear the way in which princes should keep faith. But appearances should also be deceptive. Should be. Machiavelli was keenly aware from his years as a diplomat that there was one way a ruler should appear and another way a ruler should act. A little deception could go a long way. And listen to what the man says himself. Everyone admits how praiseworthy it is in a prince to keep his word and to behave with integrity rather than cunning. Nevertheless, our experience has been that those princes who have done great things have considered keeping their word of little account and have known how to beguile men's minds by shrewdness and cunning. In the end, these princes have overcome those who have relied on keeping their word. Did you hear what he said? And Machiavelli is referenced by politicians and kings and power mongers throughout the centuries ever since. What he just said was, never, ever, ever keep your word if it's going to cost you your power. My friends, this is how politicians act. You need to know this. They understand their audiences. They understand what they need to say in order to gain and maintain support. They can go to one group and say one thing, and they can go to another group and say the exact opposite. And they have to look sincere. They have to look wise. They have to look like they care. All these things. Machiavelli goes on to say, occasionally words must serve to veil the facts. You think our politicians don't act like this? Even the ones that say they're Christians? Occasionally words must serve to veil the facts, but let this happen in such a way that no one become aware of it. Or if it should be noticed, excuses must be at hand to be produced immediately. We've seen that this election cycle. One particular candidate is for fracking, against fracking, for fracking, against fracking. Whatever. You know what? It doesn't matter. Just hopefully nobody figures it out. That's all. Say what you got to say and hope no one figures it out. That was Absalom. Just out there saying what needs to be said in order to gain power. Next week, I want to wrap this sermon up. I'm going to go to Moses. I'm going to go to Job. And we're going to see what real justice looks like. And we're going to see what it looks like to choose people who will be judges over you. Judges, we're talking about here. In the meantime, consider Absalom. Consider Absalom's skill in getting himself elected. We'll see next week. They had no idea what to do once he was elected. But in the meantime, he's trying so hard to get himself elected. And he actually did get it done. I hope what we talked about this morning helps you for the rest of your life to be able to look and see the difference between the actions and the words of those who are vying for civic power and responsibility. Lying politicians is nothing new. Absalom has shown the way even before Machiavelli. He was a man who understood certain things that you have to be able to do in order to get public support from a foolish populace. And it was a foolish populace. Shall we pray?